All right. Hey, good morning, everybody. I am glad you joined me today because we're going to start a new book. We're going to start a new book called Mara, Daughter of the Nile. All right. Pretty exciting stuff, but I promise you, I've read this book many, many times to many, many classes. The kids love this book, especially towards the end. There's a lot of action, there's a lot of surprising events that take place, and there's a lot of tension. And the payoff is wonderful if you stay with the book at the beginning. It's a harder book than it's the hardest book we'll read this year. The vocabulary is harder and more difficult. The complexity of the story is more difficult, but there is a payoff if you stay with it. So you will enjoy this book. It's got a lot of everything. So I'm going to get and the chapters are longer, so I'm going to have to just read through, and I can't pause and explain as much, okay? So I'm just going to tell you a little bit about it by reading the back of the book. And it says, Mara is a proud, beautiful slave girl who yearns for freedom. In order to gain it, she finds herself playing the dangerous role of double spy. So there's intrigue here for two arch enemies, each of whom supports a contender for the throne of Egypt. So now we're talking about pharaohs and political intrigue and spying and all those kind of interesting, fun stuff. Against her will, Mara finds herself falling in love with one of her masters. Romance, there's a romance if you're into that sort of thing. And she starts to believe in his plans of restoring Thutmose III to the throne. But just when Mara is ready to offer this person her help and her heart, her duplicity is discovered, that she's playing both sides. She's trying to play both sides. And a battle ensues in which both Mara's life and the fate of Egypt as a whole are at stake. Okay, and it says a dangerous espionage and an unusual love story. All right, very good. Okay, so that's what we're going to be into. All right, and let's get started on it. Like I said, you got to pay attention to each part. And here we go. I'm going to do the contents. I want to tell you a little bit about the table of contents, because part one happens in Menfi, which is behind me, ancient Menfi. It's changed its name many times. It's now called Memphis. And then there's part two, the river. And the river you're thinking of is the river I'm thinking of, the Nile River. And part three, the palace. And then part four, the inn, I-N-N. And then part five, the ring. Part six, the trap. All right. So I'm not sure, I'm having technical issues here. Okay. All right, so let's get started in it. Chapter one, the mysterious passenger. This is part one, Menfi, chapter one, and I'm only going to do one today. The mysterious passenger. Nakonk, captain of the Nile boat Silver Beetle, paused for the 50th time beside his vessel's high-peaked prow and shaded his eyes to peer anxiously across the wharfs. The city that rose beyond them shimmered, almost drained of color in the glare of the Egyptian noon. Doorways were blue-black and white buildings. Alleys were plunged in shadow. The gay colors of the sails and hulls that crowded the harbor seemed faded and indistinct. And even the green of the Nile was overlaid by a blinding surface of glitter. Only the sky was vivid, curving in a high blue arch over the ancient Menfi. The wharf itself seethed with activity. Sweating porters hurried in and out among groups of merchants haggling over stacks of cargo yet to be loaded. Sailors, both foreign and Egyptian, swarmed everywhere, talking in a babel of tongues, meaning different languages. A donkey drover pushed through a cluster of pale-faced Libyans, shouting at his laden beasts. Three Mitanni traders in the fringed garments of Babel led wagers on a dogfight at one end of the wharf, while a ring of yelling urchins surrounded a cage of monkeys at the other, a bunch of kids. Over all rose the rank smell of the river, an odor compounded of fish, mud, water-soaked rope, pitch, and crocodiles. But nowhere in that tangle was the one tall figure for which the captain searched. So Nakonk is this old river captain. He's looking for this tall figure. He's waiting. Nakonk chewed his lip and drummed upon the gunwale of his with his big blunt fingers. An hour ago, he had been uneasy. Now he was so tense that when his helmsman strolled across the deck and touched his elbow, he leaped as if it had been burned. "By Set and all the devils," he roared, whirling about savagely. "Fool, coming upon me like that from behind. What do you want?" The helmsman took a hasty step back. The cargo," he mumbled. "Everything is stowed, master. We're ready to sail." "Well, we await orders." "Oh, then await them then." The helmsman laid his right hand on his left shoulder in the attitude of submission and escaped casting puzzled glances backward as he did so. The conch sighed explosively and mopped the sweat off his upper lip with a hairy wrist. He was a burly man with a fierce jaw contradicted by mild brown eyes. And just now he looked and felt a good deal older than his 40 years. For a moment, he leaned warily against the gunwale, staring upriver where the luxurious barge of some noble moved over the sparkling water like a gigantic water bug, 12 oars on each side dipping rhythmically. Then he straightened, shoved his square-cut black wig askew in order to scratch under it, and adjusted it again with an irritable slap. Automatically, his eyes checked the Silver Beetle, moving about her trim, scrubbed confines from the two great sweeps at the stern to the tall masts with their horizontally furled sails, past the tiny cabin to the bales of wool and hides stacked on the deck. The oarsmen lounged at their posts. Yes, all was ready to sail, so far as cargo and crew were concerned. But the passenger, paying attention to the passenger, the puzzling, unpredictable, portentous passenger whose very charm set alarm bells ringing loudly in Nakonk's mind. What of him? Nakonk swore under his breath, wishing fervently that cargo and crew were all he had to worry about, wishing he knew either more or less. It was dangerous to have brains these days in the land of Kent. That means Egypt. He took a restless turn about the deck, his joined hands flapping impatiently at his back, and reviewed once more his brief acquaintance with the missing passenger. So now we're going to go back in time and see where Nakonk met this mysterious passenger. It was an acquaintance only 10 days old, so we're going to go back 10 days ago. He had seen the young man for the first time the morning he had set sail from Thebes on this trip to Menphi. Since the youth, Sheftu, he had said his name was, had paid his passage promptly, there seemed no reason to give him a second thought. He was pleasant but unobtrusive, tall, somewhere around 20 years old, with an attractively homely face and a common white shinty and headcloth like 1,000 others. A shinty is what they wear, the type of clothes. Except for a certain odd, lazy grace in the way he moved, the captain found nothing unusual about him. That was at first. Later, during the long sun-drenched days of the Beetle's journey down the river, Nakonk had good reason to study his passenger more attentively. Remember, I told you about how ancient people were able to look at people and read them and be able to tell this person's rich or this person is poor, this person has this belief or religion, or this person comes from this place, or they have this origin, this ethnicity. They can look at that and tell. Much more observant than we are today. Only then did he become aware of other details. For instance, the areas of slightly paler skin on Sheftu's upper arms, which indicated that he habitually wore bracelets. though his sole ornament now was a curious amulet on his left wrist. Also, the absent, brooding expression, which sat so oddly on his young face, and the suave charm which covered this instantly if he knew he was being watched. He can turn on a certain charm if people were studying him, and he would change what he was doing. The charm itself was a little odd once you thought of it. Since when did a scribe's apprentice, remember scribes are people that did the writing, and he's a scribe's apprentice, which means he's not wealthy, but he kind of acts like he is in a weird way. Since when did a scribe's apprentice, for so Sheftu had described himself, possess the smooth and subtle manners of a courtier? A courtier is someone who is in the court of a king, like the pharaoh. The captain grew surer and surer that his passenger was no ordinary nobody. Breeding was written in every line of his long, well-muscled body, and his voice had the careless authority of one accustomed to being obeyed. However, Nakonk might have noticed none of this had it not been for a conversation which suddenly focused his attention on the young man. It took place early one morning, about 5 days out of Thebes, another city. The Silver Beetle, which is called the name of the boat, was sailing past an ancient temple surrounded by scaffolding and piles of stone, around which workmen swarmed busily. Nakonk, standing alone at the door of his cabin, scowled across the river and shook his head. "Aye, there it is again," he muttered sourly to himself. "Oh, what do you mean, Captain?" Nakonk jumped. He had not heard his passenger come up beside him. "Why, the rebuilding of that old temple yonder," he answered, pointing. "If I've seen that site once, I've seen it 40 times in the past few years. Our good Queen Hatshepsut evidently thinks gold grows on papyrus stalks. Does she mean to restore every ancient building up and down the Nile?" Nakonk grunted as scaffolds and workmen slipped upstream past the Beetle's stern sweeps. "It's not only the old ruins. Ammon himself knows what her new temple at Thebes is costing poor folk like me in sweat and taxes." So the pharaoh, the queen now, is Hatshepsut, and she's using all the tax money that normal Egyptians are paying her to building these, or to restoring these great temples and these old buildings, and especially her temple that's in her honor. "The new temple is a beautiful one, though," remarked Sheftu. "They say every wall of the inner room is covered with handsomely carved reliefs." "Reliefs depicting Her Majesty's sacred birth, no doubt?" inquired the captain sardonically. "Of course, what better subject could there be? Hatshepsut was fathered by the sun himself, the sun in the sky, which is Ra, nursed by goddesses, and named Pharaoh in her cradle." "Aye, so she claims, snorted Nakonk incautiously. "As for me, I would rather see a man on the throne of Egypt. That young Thutmose, her half-brother, when is he to grow up? For 15 years now, she's been acting as his regent, spending gold and silver like water, sending ships mine among them, to the edge of the world for her own amusement, letting the empire foul its rudder for want of trained soldiers, and still the king does not come of age. Why? It's obvious, friend. He's not allowed to, nor will he ever be. Hatshepsut is Pharaoh, and Egypt must put up with it." So, Nakonk doesn't like Hatshepsut. Of course, he's being kind of dumb right now by saying so, because you can be put to death by speaking ill of the pharaoh. And so now we know also that Hatshepsut has a younger half-brother who was meant to become pharaoh, but she's not allowing that. "You do not admire the queen, Captain?" It was the very blandness of the voice that caused the alarm bells to clang suddenly in Nakonk's mind. He swung around and really looked at his passenger for the first time, noted the cleverness of the irregular dark face, the odd little smile hovering about the mouth, the dangerous alertness of the long black eyes. Nakonk went cold all over. What had he been saying? It was treason to speak against the queen, near treason even to mention the young king's name above a whisper, much less actually complain. Full of a sudden clear picture of himself impaled on the torturous stake, like having a spear going right through him, in the midst of some desert, he sagged back against the cabin door. May the queen live forever, he exclaimed. May my tongue be clipped if it utters a word against Hatshepsut, the daughter of the sun. Hey, rest easy, Captain. Sheftu's voice was like a purr. You but stated an opinion. But you are somewhat indiscreet. That means you're not very smart with saying so. You should be more careful about how you say it. There are those who might haul you off to the palace dungeons at once if they heard what I just heard. He gave Nakonk a moment to absorb that thought, then added casually, So you would overthrow the queen? By the feather of truth, I said no such thing, gasped Nakonk. He darted an agonized glance up and down the deck, then strode to a deserted spot in the bows. Sheftu followed, his face amused. A wise precaution, he commented, arranging himself comfortably against the gunwale. They say the queen's spies are everywhere. No doubt, Nakonk was convinced he was talking to one that minute. Nakonk now thinks Sheftu's a spy for the queen. He wiped the sweat from his forehead and attempted to change the subject, but Sheftu overrode him. She has grounds for her constant suspicions. There's a group of reckless fools and thieves, no doubt you've heard of them, who have organized in secret to topple Hatshepsut off her throne and set young Thutmose there instead. So there's a movement to get rid of Hatshepsut and install Thutmose as the pharaoh. I know nothing of them, nothing. Such movements have started before and have been squashed like beetles. They must be fools indeed. Who would try again? Perhaps, Sheftu shrugged expressively. He had lowered his voice, moving a little closer to Nakonk. But one must give them credit, Captain. They have courage, and they insist they are fighting for what all Egypt really wants. They say it's monstrous that a woman should wear the double crown and call herself not royal wife and consort, but king and pharaoh. They say the backs of the people are breaking under her taxes, that the children's ribs show plainer with every statue of herself she erects in the new temple, while Count Senmut, the architect, her favorite, the Lord high everything in Egypt, grows mysteriously richer each time a porch is built or a terrace paved. Captain, they say, but I quote, you understand, they say she grows so arrogant that the gods themselves will soon rise up to strike her down, and Egypt with her, should we permit. Nakonk's brain was spinning. What was this young rogue up to, talking like a spy one minute, a firebrand the next? But no, of course he was but quoting. Yet the captain found himself responding fiercely to the forbidden words. Aye, it was true. It was all true, and everyone knew it. Count Senmut had a finger in every pot in Egypt. And as for the queen, that usurper, beware, clang the alarm bells. You're walking into a trap. Sheftu was still talking softly, insistently. Should we permit these crimes, they ask? Can we risk the anger of the gods? Is not this woman a peril to all in the Black Land? That's another name for Egypt, the Black Land, because of the black mud along the Nile. Nakonk grasped blindly at a safe question whose answer tradition had taught him. The first Thutmose, he who was Pharaoh in my youth, he lives with the gods now. He will protect Egypt from their anger. For Hatshepsut's sake? Came the mocking whisper. For the sake of the daughter who snatched his throne without waiting for him to die? Captain, he disowned her himself. He chiseled her name off all his monuments. I know not for whose sake. I know nothing, snarled Nekak. You'll not trick me into speaking treason. I tell you, Hatshepsut is Pharaoh. So be it. Maybe young Thutmose is not fit to rule. Aye, that's it. Only a weakling could be held down so long by a woman, like a rabbit in a snare. There was no answer for a moment. When Sheftu spoke again, his voice was grim and quiet, without a trace of mockery. You are mistaken, Captain, he said. Thutmose is no rabbit. He is a lion, and the snare is not made that will hold a lion forever. Nekak turned slowly. By the blessed sun, he exclaimed. Which camp are you in, young man? Who speaks treason now? Sheftu eased back against the gunwale, his face bland and expressionless. Why, no one, my friend, he murmured. We spoke only of snares and rabbits. Suddenly he smiled. It had an astonishing effect, that smile. It lightened up his dark, irregular features with a charm that seemed to warm the world. The nervous sweat dried on Nekak's brow, and his throat relaxed. He was even conscious of an obscure exhilaration, a sense of well-being. He found himself grinning genially. Aye, you're quite right, mate, he agreed. Snares and rabbits, nothing more. Sheftu bowed and took himself off to the other end of the ship, and there was no more conversation that day. But Nekak watched his passenger with feverish interest from that hour on. By the time the Silver Beetle docked at Menfi, he was convinced that Sheftu was not and never had been a scribe's apprentice. Apprentice is a helper. In fact, he strongly suspected that the youth was one of those very fools or heroes who had secretly rallied about the king, meaning Thutmose, Hatshepsut's younger half-brother. Furthermore, he realized with a reckless sort of excitement that he too would be glad to offer his life to such a cause for the sake of this extraordinary young man, his fettered king, and the Egypt they both loved. Now, 2 days after docking, the new cargo was stowed and all was ready to sail, but still there was no sign of Sheftu. He had left the vessel as soon as it tied up, having arranged to return with it to Thebes when the time came. Then he had vanished into the tangle of mud brick buildings, twisting streets, and hurrying shouts, sweating humanity that was Menfi. He had not come back. Restlessly, Nekak paced his scrubbed acacia decks from gunwale to cabin, from cabin to sweeps, back again to gunwale. Ominous pictures rose in his mind. Sheftu seized by some spy of the queen. Sheftu questioned and tortured by torture. Sheftu hanging head downward from the city walls. That happened in our previous book, The Hittite Warrior. What a fool I am, thought Nekak desperately. Why do I fret over the young rogue? For all I know, he's reporting me to the queen's men this instant. No, by Ammon. When he spoke of the king, he spoke his heart. I'd stake my last copper on it. Copper is the money. If I had told him, if I had offered myself and my ship to him and the king, then he would have let me know his plans. What to do if he did not come back? That I knew more or less, or else nothing at all. What a fool I am. Why doesn't he come? And then there's a little cut scene. We're going to go somewhere else now. Eastward from the wharf is another part of the city. A young slave girl of about 17 years sat in a sunny corner between her master's storerooms and his garden wall. She was bending over a papyrus roll held carefully in her lap, and her lips moved as she read. This must be Mara. So we saw Sheftu just now. We met Sheftu in the conch, and now we're meeting Mara. Spend the day merrily. Put unguent and fine oils together to thy nostrils. Set singing and music before thy face. Cast all evil behind thee, and bethink thee only of joy, till comes that day of mourning in the land that loveth silence. Spend every day merrily. She's reading. And that just means live life, live happily while you're alive, because when you're not alive, you can't enjoy anything because you'll be dead. Mara! The harsh voice shattered the quiet of the garden. The girl snatched up the papyrus and stuffed it into her sash, half turning away from the grim-faced woman who had appeared in the storeroom door. So there you are, Miss Blue-Eyed, good-for-nothing, the woman said angrily. Idling away your time while the rest of us work like the slaves we are. Up with you! The master's shanties must be starched and pleated. I wish they clothed his corpse, muttered Mara, flashing a venomous look over her shoulder. Aye, well, so wish we all, retorted the other. But Zasha's far from in his tomb, and his stick's livelier than he is, as you'll know if he comes home from his jewel trading and finds you skulking here. Come now, up with you. I come. Go away, Tita. Nay, I'll not go until I see you on your feet and starting for the pressing rooms. Move now. Tita leaned farther out the door and peered suspiciously over Mara's shoulder. What's that you're hiding? You thieving wretch! One of the master's scrolls again? I'll take my oath. I remember the last time he all but took the flesh off your shoulders. Stupid! Isn't once enough? Put it back, make haste, or I won't answer for your life. Reading, she grumbled, turning back into the house as Mara scrambled to her feet and ran in the direction of the room of books. Idle as the mistress herself, when there's ironing to be done, and a thrashing is all she'll get for her high and mighty airs. May the keft things take that Zasha and all his kin, fumed Mara as she ran up the red graveled path. Better not to live at all than to live like this. I swear the dogs in the marketplace have a better life. So Mara is pretty sassy for a slave, as you can see. And it kind of reminds me of Uriah from the last book, where he said it'd be better to be dead than a slave, and then he, of course, had to eat those words later. Now Mara's kind of saying the same thing. She pulled open the heavy door and slipped across the cool clay pavements of the room of books to shove the papyrus to its place among the others on the shelf. For a moment she stood, letting her envious gaze rest on one neat roll after another. The Proverbs of Ptah-hotep, the prophecies of Neferohu, the Book of Surgery, the Eloquent Peasant, Bafra's Tale, forbidden treasure houses of wisdom and poetry and ancient fable, which it was a crime for her to touch. Yet Zasha could read no more of it than could his vain and empty-headed lady, who spent most of her time before a mirror. He could write no more than his name, but must call in a scribe on every occasion. Mara's lip curled. Beast. Slave though she was, she could both read and write, thanks to a former master. And she spoke Babylonian as well as her own tongue. So here you have a bilingual slave who is literate, who can read and write. That's very rare, a very rare sight. And there's more, but we'll get to it. But what good did it do her? Zasha was rich, and that was what counted. He was rich, and he was free. She turned to look wistfully about the room, and as she did so, the old memory returned to haunt her. It was all so long ago and vague now that she never knew whether it was real or imagined. But somehow, somewhere, maybe only in a dream, she had known a room like this only finer, high-ceilinged and luxurious, with rich furnishings and shelves of scrolls. There were times when her conviction was strong that she had once lived a different life. Sometimes, very seldom now that she had grown older, there had even come the fleeting vision of a face, a beautiful smiling face with blue eyes like her own, and the dim recollection of someone bending over her and laughing. A dismal rumbling from her stomach brought her back to the present. Someone will be bending over me with a stick soon, she thought. I had best be gone from here. So she has a memory of not being a slave her whole life. That actually, she was born into a fine family. And she also has blue eyes, which is very rare for an Egyptian slave. Her stomach protested its emptiness once again, making her feel lightheaded and dizzy as she hurried out of the room and across the garden. She clenched her teeth and pulled her sash tighter. One thing she could never remember was a time when she had not been hungry. Well, Tita, the scroll is returned, she remarked as she entered the storeroom. Where are the precious shanties of this swineherd, that son of wretched Cush, beloved of crocodiles? Behold them in their usual place, rasped Tita, pointing. That tongue of yours will flap once too often, reckless one. Be silent and useful for once. Tita turned back to her task of sealing wine jars, and the earthy smell of the clay she was using mingled with that of the hot starch as the two worked for a while in silence. Presently, a new fragrance drifted in through the open door from the direction of the kitchen nearby, the fragrance of roasting waterfowl. That's like roasted duck. Ah, groaned Mara, stopping in the midst of wringing out one of the linen kilts. Great Ammon! Is there anything at all to eat in this place? Tita tamped down the pottery bung, tied it firmly with linen, capped it with the clay, and pressed down Zasha's seal before she answered. Then she half turned, gesturing toward the shelves that lined the walls. Plenty, she said sarcastically. Help yourself. Mara's eyes traveled over the shelves, stacked with jars and kegs and stacks of dried fish, all sealed and untouchable, save at the order of the mistress, meaning Zasha's wife. Then she finished wringing out the shenty, flung it in the basket, and gave another yank to her sash. Someday, she said through her teeth, I'm going to have gold, so much gold that I could eat roasted waterfowl every day, so much that I could buy Zasha and his simpering wife and all his relatives and toss them to the crocodiles. Tita laughed shrilly. Hi, tell me another, stupid. A slave you are, and a slave you'll be, if you don't die before your time from the beatings you get from your impudence. Gold. Hi, gold. Yes, gold, thought Mara, and jewels, and linen so sheer you can see through it, and little alabaster pots like the mistress's to hold the paint for my eyelids. And freedom, freedom. A slave I'll not be all my life. Someday there'll be a chance, and though it cost my neck, I'll take it, snatch it. She hurled the last kilt into the basket and swung the basket to her head. Farewell, Tita, she muttered, starting for the pressing rooms. Take care that you don't faint of emptiness where the mistress can see you. It might offend her. Gold, retorted Tita, still chuckling under her breath. Ha! Gold! Mara slammed the door behind her. She crossed the courtyard to the pressing rooms with the smooth, swinging stride made second nature to those who habitually carried burdens on the head. Setting the basket on a stool beside the narrow table, she went to poke up the fire that was to heat the irons to press the shenties, the clothing. Spend the day merrily, echoed the song of the harper ironically in her mind. Bethink thee only of joy, till comes to that day of mooring in the land that loveth silence. Lo, none that hath gone may come again. Meaning after you're dead, you're gone. Aye, and who knew when that day of mooring would be upon one, swift and final? Here were the hateful fluting irons, the steaming shinties of that son of crocodile Zasha. Outside the air was soft, the sky blue as the eye of heaven. Suddenly Mara flung the poker into the fire with all her strength. She whirled out of the room and across the red gravelled path to a dom palm that grew beside the garden wall. Up she scrambled like a squirrel, her bare toes clinging to the rough bark. At the top of the wall, she glanced once over her shoulder toward the closed storeroom door, then leaped down on the other side. She just what? She just escaped. Freedom, brief and costly though it might be, was hers for a little while. She was laughing aloud as she plunged into the nearest alleyway and through the next street in the direction of the marketplace. So she knows she's not escaping for good. She'll probably be caught at some point and then beaten and hurt. So, but she needs her freedom. She wants it that bad. All right, so that's our first chapter, chapter 1. The next one, chapter 2, is called Sale of a Slave. You met three important figures. You met Nakonk and Sheftu and Mara. You also met Tita. Tita is just kind of an extra, a side character. But the three main characters so far are Nakonk, Sheftu, and Mara. You also heard about Hatshepsut and Thutmose. You got to remember them, the brother and the half-brother and the sister who are royalty. Okay, guys. You have a great day. I'll talk to you later. Enjoy. Bye-bye.